Now, if everybody could kindly move about 6 feet back from their computer, then I'll take off my mask and I can probably communicate a little better. Thanks very much. Thank you very much for indulging. So where are we related to the Twin Cities? We're on the north shore of Lake Superior, the true north shore, and we're about 11 hours. We're in Wawa, and we're about 11-hour drive from the Twin Cities. Either way you go, I'd suggest you take the northern route. You'll get a chance to see the north shore of Lake Superior, which is really quite beautiful. So what makes this area so special to begin with is that there are very few people compared to the US side. And we have a lot of national parks, Pakasa and provincial parks, Lake Superior Provincial Park, plus around the Rossport area, the National Marine Conservation Area, Sibley, the Sleeping Giant Provincial Park, Slate Islands Provincial Park. So we have a lot of parks, a lot of wilderness areas compared to the southern side. And before I get into telling you about the specific destinations on the Superior side, on our side, I'd like to tell you a couple of things that make this area, for me, really special. And of course, the first is Lake Superior. It's the world's largest freshwater lake by surface area. The largest by volume is Lake Baikal in Russia. And it's an amazing lake. I think if you drained it, you'd cover all of South and North America with a foot of water. There's no tides. You can dive in and swim down 5 feet and start drinking. It's really a remarkable lake, creates its own climate. The second thing that really makes the Canadian side really interesting for me is the Canadian Shield. And it's been there about 3.2 billion years, very stable, unchanged, and it really sets the power of the Canadian side on Lake Superior. The key change was about 2.3 billion years ago when we had the formation of the Mid-Continental Rift, which essentially was a huge volcanic eruption separating the plates between what's now Canada and the US and creating really many interesting features, including these diabase dikes here in Lake Superior Park. Beginning about 2.3 billion years ago, and over a number of stages, we've had glaciation, ice ages in a sense, that for us took all of our soil covering this beautiful bedrock and shoved it all into the northern states. And that also smoothed out the rock, made it much more exposed. What that ice also did was to compact the earth, and so during the last 10,000 years or so, the earth, the plate, has been rebounding in a process called isostatic rebound. So we have a number of these cobble raised beaches along the Superior Coast. This one in particular in Lake Superior Park is interesting because you can see partway up the beach some Pakasa pits, which I'll tell you a little bit more about later. The other thing we have on the Canadian side is the Boreal Forest, which is Canada-wide and composed mostly of spruce, jack pine, balsam fir, so coniferous needled species. And we have in an understory, especially in the Lake Superior area, that can be quite dense, decadent, and rich in lichens. For example, here on the Slate Islands with old man's beard, which is food for caribou. What's really interesting about lichens, of course, is that they're both plant and animal, but you find them in places where the air is especially clean and clear, for example, along our Canadian coastline. But what's also interesting is we have some species that are remnant of the periods of glaciations. For example, here, Butterwort, which is, partly survives by digesting insects, protein from insects that land on its leaves, or encrusted saxifrage, which has calcium all along the edges of the leaves. These plants now are found about 1,000 miles to the north of Lake Superior. But also here on Porphyry Island, to the west, on the west side of the lake, is Devil's Club. And here's a plant of great medicinal value for the First Nations. But normally it's not found in Ontario. It's found on the west coast of the US and Canada, about 1,500 miles away. So you can find both the Arctic disjuncts and these Western species all within about 100 meters or 100 yards of each other, say, for example, on Porphyry Island on the Sibley Peninsula. In terms of animals, a lot of the eagles, a lot of eagles were wiped out in the 70s by our overuse of products like DDT. And once we stopped using them, they have come back gangbusters. Eagles, for example, are all over the Canadian coast now. Peregrine falcons have also returned. And in fact, the first pair was a male from Nova Scotia and a female from Michigan who found love near Devil's Warehouse Island. And now there's at least 12 nests on the Lake Superior coast from Lake Superior Park up to Hattie Cove and Pakasa National Park. And they're spectacular birds. Woodland caribou, on the other hand, are having a tough go of things. Their population has been diminishing, certainly since I've been here 27 years ago. And your best chance of seeing them is going to be on the Slate Islands near Terrace Bay. Of course, moose, wolves, beavers, these populations have pretty well stayed the same, at least since I've been here 27 years ago. We don't have a high population of deer, much like you do in the Twin Cities and in the northern US border states. In terms of indigenous people, my understanding is that they were here about 3,000 years ago. It's the Ojibwe First Nations that have inhabited the Lake Superior area. And there's lots of evidence that they've been here, although not a lot of written evidence. And the key thing you're going to see on a hiking or a paddling trip would be pictographs, and pictographs made with hematite, a mixture of hematite, fish oil, bear grease. And these things are in the order of about 500 years of age, and they tell wonderful stories. More about these a little bit later on in the slideshow. And finally, of course, along the Lake Superior coast came the voyageurs, the great Canadian fur trade, and really why we're here as a country, trading with First Nations to get beaver pelts so that people in Europe could make beaver hats. It's a strange beginning for a country, but I'm proud of it. So I'm going to go now to some of the destinations I think it's really worthwhile for you to visit. And the first is going to be Lake Superior Provincial Park. And that's located to the south. We're in Wawa, and it's located to the south of us. And the key things along this route I'd like to talk about would be the Agawa pictographs and the Gargantua Harbor area. Now, the First Nations, the indigenous people in the Superior area, believe that power from below the center of the earth comes to the earth where you have steep cliffs adjacent to the water. And that would be here, for example, at the Agawa Rock in Lake Superior Park. And along this rock, you'll find at least 100 pictographs. There's probably more, but they haven't always withstood the test of time. And of these 100 pictographs, the one of most interest to me is Michipicoten, the great horned lynx. And the great horned lynx lives in Lake Superior, apparently in the Michipicoten Island area. And it's the responsibility of Michipichu to protect the plants, the animals, the land, and the minerals and the waters of Lake Superior from what would otherwise be the ravages of people. This is Devil's Warehouse Island. This is where north of Gargantua, north of Agawa Rock, there's a cave on the north end of the island. And this is where First Nations found the hematite that was used to make the pictographs at Agawa Bay. Further north is Nanabush Rock, and Nanabush Rock, or Devil's Chair, is where Nanabush, a great Ojibwe spirit, a trickster, a benefactor, landed after jumping across Lake Superior from the Whitefish Bay area. Nanaboho taught First Nations how to hunt and fish and trap. And again, he was a bit of a trickster. He stayed for a while, left later to head up, become the giant up at Sibley in an effort to protect the silver mine at Sibley, at Silver Island. Now you're probably wondering why these things are called Devil's Chair and Devil's Warehouse Island. And that's part of an effort of the Jesuit missionaries when they first came to this land to convert the First Nations to Christianity. Now, the Gargantua area is the kind of the center point along the coastal trail in Lake Superior Park. The Devil's Chair, Devil's Warehouse Island are further up the screen. Gargantua, the name Gargantua itself came from a French novel, a satirical, scatological novel written to mock the French royalty in the 1500s. And my suspicion is the Gargantua and is kind of the Voyager version of Nanaboho or Nanabush. The trail itself follows the coastline quite closely from Agawa Bay to Chaffant Cove in the north with Gargantua in the center. And it is a challenging trail. You can see often you're following sand, but also boulder beaches, which can be treacherous when it's wet. So don't plan on knocking this trail off really quickly. It is quite demanding compared to what we see as trails in the northern US. I'm going to move now to my favorite section of coastline for paddling, that is, and that's from Hattie Cove in Pakasa National Park, about 170 miles, about 110 miles to the south and east to our base in Michipicoten Bay and Wawa. And it's a spectacular wilderness coastline. Now, a couple of features that make this coastline really special to me would be waterfalls. And one of the best would be Cascade Falls, which is about halfway down the coastline, right across from Otter Island. And this is one of the few waterfalls that drop directly into Lake Superior. It's wonderful in the summer to wash underneath the falls and swim in the pool just above the falls. Further south is the falls at the Swallow River. And then my favorite is, and actually the favorite of Bill Mason, one of the Canada's iconic filmmakers and paddlers, is Denison Falls. And that's a 100-foot cascading drop located just up from Lake Superior on the Dog River. And that's about 20 miles to the west of our location at Michipicoten Bay. So about a day's paddle, and you've got this spectacular waterfall. Another feature that makes the Pakasa coastline really unique are Pakasa pits. And because the Ojibwe history is not a written one, the actual reason for these pits, there is some debate around what they're used for. Excuse me. And that theory ranges from sites for sacrificial rituals, the youth making the transition from being youth to adulthood, to caches for food, to hunting blinds. These are really fantastic structures to see. One of the most interesting ones is here near Richardson, across from Richardson Island, where the Pakasa pit actually rises from the ground. And this may also have been used as a lookout to spy on other people traveling north up the coast. The trail itself is about 15 miles in length. It's one way from Hattie Cove in the north to the North Swallow River in the south. It's again a demanding trail. Big sections are inland, and if you have the money, about $500 Canadian, it's really worthwhile to take a boat shuttle from the Hattie Cove to the south end of the trail and hike back. Now, if you don't have a lot of time, it's really worthwhile to do the trail from the Pakasa Park Campground. It's about a day hike out to the suspension bridge across the White River. It's a fairly easy trail. My next favorite route or destination is actually very much closer to you, probably in the order of 5 hours. And that's the Sibley whale tail from the Silver Islet area to Rossport area on Lake Superior. And these are a couple of shots of what it looks like. So the shoreline and the camping here is quite different from what you find on the Pakasa coast. On the Pakasa coast, you're going to have smooth boulders and sandy beaches, round cobbles. And along the Sibley Peninsula, you're going to find more angular rocks, more red-colored rocks. Now, if you get a chance, it's worth making a stop at Silver Islet, just a little bit out on the water. This Islet was actually the source of some of the richest silver mines in the world for a period of time. It was very productive, but the water had to be pumped out of the mine. And one year they failed to do that, and the mine flooded, and that was it for Silver Islet. It's the sleeping giant nearby, Thunder Bay, is where Nanaboho jumped from Lake Superior to rest and to protect this great silver resource from the ravages of the Europeans. One of my favorite destinations along this coastline is the island of St. Ignace and the state of Narivia. Now, in the 1970s, a couple of professors from Lakehead University discovered that St. Ignace Island, which is the third largest in Lake Superior, had not been properly defined as being part of Ontario or part of Canada. So they traveled there and they established the state of Narivia. And of course, as part of the establishment involved a Narivian flag, an animal, a passport, a plant, and of course the mighty cedar as the tree. They've also have some geodesic domes there, so if you'd like to stay, there's a possibility that you can stop by and stay in Narivia. Now, I'm a proud citizen of Narivia. All you need to do if you want to be a citizen of Narivia is to follow the divine Narivian laws, which I'll read to you. What you bring, you take home. What is on Narivia stays there. Domestic pets are barred entry, and radios and music machines with external speakers are alien to Narivia. So follow those guidelines and visit the island, and you too, like me, can be a happy citizen of Narivia. Porphyry Island is also a really great stop along the way because it has a long history as a lighthouse location, but it's also a place where you can see the Devil's Club plant and the encrusted saxifrage and butterwort, the Arctic disjuncts, all together in the same place. It's also possible to rent accommodations in the old lighthouse keeper's house on the island. Now, in Thunder Bay, nearby, there's a very large Finnish population. It's been there for a long time. And as a consequence, in many of the bays and inlets along the Sibley coast, you're going to find hidden saunas. And these are open to anybody. All you need to do is keep it clean and replenish the wood supply. And there's nothing more wonderful than after a day of paddling to stop at a sauna and chill. If we will go a little further to the east from St. Ignace Island, we hit Simpson Island, and there's a really fascinating geological feature there, columnar basalts formed by the cooling of basalt, volcanic molten basalt. These 6 to 12-sided structures vary in size according to how fast they cooled. The largest that can actually be found in Ireland called the Giant's Causeway. And these are absolutely a fascinating place to visit along the coast. Finally, along this coast is Battle Island and the Battle Island Lighthouse. What's fascinating here is this lighthouse, the windows were knocked out of the lighthouse and it's 100 feet above more than 100 feet above the water, knocked out during 80-mile-an-hour winds in a storm in the mid-70s. Just a demonstration of how powerful Lake Superior can be. In terms of hiking destinations along the Sibley coast, a great first stop is near the Sibley Provincial Park. This is the top of the Giant hike. It's about 14 miles, very challenging hike, but the view is fantastic. If you want something a little easier, there's the Lion's Head hike. I think it's about a couple of hours, and you get to see the sea lion, which is a dye-based outcrop into Lake Superior. There was actually a head on the sea lion which collapsed near the end of the last century. I've not done it myself, but there's a really challenging trail, that Catskill Trail, which extends from Rossport about 30 miles to Terrace Bay. And I'm really impressed by the Death Valley segment, which is not necessarily a description of what it does to you, but it's more a description of how where First Nations could easily shoot moose and caribou from the cliffs along the trail. The really interesting part along this section is on the coast at Worthington Bay, where right down by the beach, approximately here, you're able to see old pictographs, including the iconic Thunderbird. Moving now along to the islands of Lake Superior on the Canadian side. If we head about 10 miles south of Terrace Bay on Superior, we get to the Slate Islands. And they have a really interesting history. They were formed about 1 billion years ago by what is believed to be an asteroid about 1 mile wide and traveling at about 10 kilometers per second when it crashed into the Earth and created this cone shape of islands. And there were a number of things that resulted from that. The first would be what are called shatter cones. And typically these are about 5 inches to 12 inches in length. It's a rock formation like a cone. But the world's largest shatter cone is believed to be right here in McGreevy Harbor on the Slate Islands. And it's about 15, here it is here. And it's about 15 yards in height. And that's really awesome. Mind you, the Russians say they have a larger one, but I've yet to see pictures of it. The other thing that the crashing asteroid did was to really bring the minerals from below the surface to the surface. So there are all kinds of old abandoned mining adits for copper, and on the shoreline in the quartz veins, you can actually see visible gold. So it's really interesting to see. The island would be fully mined now, except that it was made a park in about, I think it's 1985. But one of the most cool features about the Slate Islands are the caribou. And in the 1920s, caribou crossed the ice to get to the Slate Islands. And there had really been no wolves, no predators during a long period of time. So by the mid-60s, there were about 900 animals, six to 900 animals on the island. And it was at that time that our Ministry of Natural Resources took about 8 animals from the Slate Islands and shipped them over to Michipicoten Island. And I'll talk about that next. Now, Michipicoten Island is the second largest island in Lake Superior after Isle Royale. It's about 40 miles from our base in Wawa, but the shortest crossing is about 10, 11 miles from along the Pakasa coast at Cairn Point. And it has what makes this area really interesting would first be the geology. It's an extension of the Keweenaw Peninsula, and so it's copper rich, but there's a lot of other interesting things going on. Now, it was in the 1640s, a Jesuit father heard stories from the First Nations talking about the copper on the island and how it was fraught with danger and disaster to be taking copper from the island. But of course, as soon as white people got news of it, there was a copper rush, and that has not been very successful, except that I can tell you that the copper on the Canadian Parliament buildings is made from Michipicoten Island copper. Now, of course, there were a lot of caribou on Michipicoten Island until the miners came along, copper miners came along, and they ate all the caribou during the winter. And so it was in 1968, as I mentioned, that caribou were shipped from the Slate Islands to Michipicoten Island. And their population, again, without predators, grew very rapidly to about 2014, when there were about 900 animals. And in 2014, apparently there was an ice bridge from the mainland to Michipicoten Island, and about 4 wolves crossed over to Michipicoten Island. And they had a field day. By 2017, there were about 20 caribou left, and during that winter, fall and winter, our government arranged for about 15 of those animals to be shipped back to the Slate Islands, and about 6 were shipped over to Caribou Island further out in Lake Superior. Now, the poor wolves started to starve, and happily in 2019, they were shipped to Isle Royale to help with suffering dynamic between wolves and moose. And so I think this is a happy story, and I hope that it's going to end well. The last thing you can see on Michipicoten Island that's worth taking a look at would be the lighthouse, of which there were only 8 built using a flying buttress approach. So our last stop is going to be at Pic Island, which is near Naze Provincial Park, just south of Naze Provincial Park, and across from the Group of 7 trail, a trail I've not done, under development from Hattie Cove and Pakasa Park up to Naze Provincial Park. And what makes this area so special is that the rocks are really powerful. The landscape is really powerful, formed essentially from the inside of a volcanic magma chamber collapsing upon itself, and then being exposed through glaciation and time to create these very powerful landscapes. And these powerful landscapes played a significant, were significant to Canada's iconic Group of 7 during the 1920s when they explored the area and painted. And Lauren Harris's Pic Island is perhaps the most famous painting from that time. This painting, of course, was a favorite of comedian Steve Martin. Some other images from the group of 7 talking about what we in Wawa call God's light. And here is what inspired them from the front view of our lodge. Now we're located at the mouth of the Michipicoten River near Wawa on Lake Superior. We have a bed and breakfast, but mostly we run sea kayak trips and trips with our Voyager canoe along the entire Canadian Lake Superior coast. It's beautiful, and I hope I've inspired you to come and visit. If you stay with us, we do run day trips and stand-up paddleboard instruction and sea kayak instruction. And I hope that you will be able to visit us, if not this year, then maybe next year. If you do come, recognize that our speed limit is in the order of 90 kilometers an hour, about 55 miles an hour. Credit cards work here. Gas is substantially more expensive here than it is in the US. The exchange rate is quite favorable for you, so that your cost of your vacation will be a lot less in Canada. When you cross the border, you want to have a passport. Don't bring any guns. The Canadian border people do not get pretty excited if you've got guns. And be very careful about bringing across fresh food. Some things, for example, oranges are not permitted in Canada. Crownland camping, if you're camping outside of the parks, plan on about $10 per day per person, unless an outfitter like us provides you with accommodations, or for example, you rent a tent from us, or if you do a trip with us. In terms of what you need to outfit your kayak with, if you meet the regulations in Minnesota, then you're fine as far as Canada goes. You don't need to register your boat. So I hope I've given you a great taste of what it's like to paddle on the Canadian coast. That's our website addresses. The bottom one, lakesuperior.adventures.ca, we put together for people who want to do it yourself. Thanks again very much for your time today. I really enjoyed an opportunity to chat. And thank you, Fran, for your time.